Most people believe being ready for Jesus' return means watching world events or decoding prophecy. But the truth is this: many believers who think they are ready are the ones most at risk of being unprepared. What if spiritual readiness has almost nothing to do with knowing the signs of the times and everything to do with how you're living on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon? That question unsettles people because it shifts the focus away from charts, theories, and headlines and places it squarely on the heart. Over the years, I've met faithful churchgoers who knew Scripture well, followed Christian teaching closely, and yet carried a quiet unease inside. Not fear of judgment, but a deeper question they rarely voiced. If Jesus came today, would he find me truly awake or just busy? This message is not here to scare you. It's here to give you peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't depend on knowing dates or signs, but on knowing where you stand with God right now. In the next few minutes, we're going to talk about what spiritual readiness actually looks like in real life. Not in theory, not in perfection, but in the quiet daily choices that fill your lamp with oil and allow you to live with confidence, clarity, and calm, no matter when Christ returns. Because readiness isn't about fearing the end. It's about living so close to Him that His coming feels like home. Have you ever had one of those late nights when the house is finally quiet, your phone is resting on the table, and there are no more notifications pulling at your attention? You glance at the clock and realize it's almost midnight. There's something about moments like that. No noise, no demands, just stillness. And sometimes, in that stillness, a question rises up from deep inside us. Not a loud question, not a dramatic one, but a very honest one. What if Jesus came back right now? Not as a religious thought, not as a theological debate, but as a deeply personal question. If Christ returned in this very moment, would your heart feel at peace, or would it tighten with uneasiness? Over the years, I've spoken with many believers. People who attend church faithfully, people who know Scripture well. And yet, when I ask this question, many of them pause. They don't answer right away, not because they don't believe, but because they're not sure they're ready. Jesus told us that He would come like a thief in the night, without warning, without announcement, not to frighten us, but to awaken us from living on autopilot. We prepare for so many things in life. We prepare for retirement. We prepare for vacations. We prepare for storms. But how often do we truly prepare for eternity? I want you to picture something with me. Imagine a soldier standing watch in the middle of the night. He doesn't know exactly when something might happen. But he's awake. His equipment is close. His eyes are forward. His ears are alert. He's not panicking. He's ready. That's what spiritual readiness looks like. It's not living in fear of the end times. It's living with awareness, with intention, with a heart that's awake. Jesus told a story that becomes more meaningful the older we get, the parable of the 10 virgins, 10 people who looked the same on the outside, all waiting, all holding lamps, all believing the bridegroom would come, and all of them fell asleep. The difference wasn't in how they looked. It was in what they carried inside. The oil. Oil can't be borrowed at the last minute. It can't be rushed. It's gathered quietly, over time. Through prayers no one sees. Through mornings when Scripture feels dry, but you open it anyway. Through choosing forgiveness when it would be easier to hold on to resentment. A retired doctor once told me something that stayed with me. He said, "I'm not afraid of Jesus returning. I'm afraid of living so distracted that I forget Him." That's a powerful statement. Most people don't drift away from faith because of major rebellion. They drift because of exhaustion, because of busyness, because life slowly pushes God to the edges. Have you ever felt that? You wake up, reach for your phone, scroll the news, answer messages. The day passes. And at night, you tell yourself, "I'll spend more time with God tomorrow." And tomorrow comes and goes the same way. Jesus once said to a church, "You have a reputation for being alive, but you are dead." Not because they weren't active, but because the fire inside was almost gone. Readiness isn't about knowing dates or signs. Scripture is clear that no one knows the hour. Readiness is about relationship. When you live close to Jesus, his return doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like a reunion, like a spouse waiting for a loved one to come home after a long journey, not counting the hours in anxiety, but remaining faithful in the waiting. Even psychology tells us this. People who live with clear values and a sense of purpose tend to face change, aging, and even death with greater peace. Faith doesn't just shape our beliefs, it shapes our inner stability. When you know you're living honestly, loving sincerely, and carrying no unresolved weight in your heart, you sleep differently. You breathe differently. And that is what readiness looks like. Not perfection, not constant intensity, but awareness. Living with the understanding that this life is not all there is, that love matters, that faithfulness matters. If Jesus returned tonight, he wouldn't be looking for people who guessed the right date. He would be looking for hearts living in the light. So maybe the real question isn't, when will he come? Maybe the real question is, how am I living today? When we talk about being ready, many people immediately think of big things. Final events, signs in the sky, global changes. But after many years of reading scripture and walking alongside people in different seasons of life, I've come to see something very different. True readiness is rarely loud. Most of the time, it's very quiet. I once met an elderly couple in their 70s in the Midwest. They weren't well known in their church. They didn't teach classes or stand behind a pulpit. But every morning, at the same time, they sat together by the window, read a short passage of scripture, and prayed. They prayed for their children, their grandchildren, their neighbors, and the world. The husband said something simple that stayed with me. We don't know when Jesus will return, but we want him to find us in the right place. That sentence captures the heart of readiness. Jesus never asked his followers to live in constant fear. He called them to stay awake. Those are two very different things. Fear makes us shrink inward. Awareness helps us live more deeply. Have you ever noticed that in the parable of the 10 virgins, all of them fell asleep? Scripture doesn't condemn sleep. What mattered wasn't that they rested, but that some of them had prepared enough oil. That detail becomes especially meaningful as we grow older. At this stage of life, many of us no longer have the energy to keep up with endless activity. But God is not asking for speed. He is asking for depth. Oil in the spiritual life doesn't come from emotional highs. It comes from quiet faithfulness, from small, repeated choices made over time. Let me ask you something very honestly. On an ordinary day with no special church service and no major crisis, where does God fit into your real life? Not on your church calendar, but in your daily interactions, in how you speak to the people closest to you, in how you respond when you're hurt, in how you sit with loneliness at night. A psychologist I once worked with said something insightful. He told me that people who experience the deepest peace later in life are not those who avoided suffering, but those who learned to place their suffering into a larger story. Faith gives them that framework. When you believe this life is not the whole story, you don't collapse when things remain unfinished. Spiritual readiness is never separated from how we live. We can't honestly say we're waiting for Christ while holding tightly to bitterness, resentment, or hidden dishonesty. Not because God is unwilling to forgive, but because those things slowly drain the oil from our lamp. Someone once told me, "I pray every day, but I still feel empty." As we talked, it became clear they were carrying an old wound they had never released. Sometimes readiness begins with a very simple decision. Forgiveness. Not because the other person deserves it, but because you don't want to carry that weight any longer. Scripture doesn't say readiness is about knowing more. It says readiness is about living rightly. And living rightly isn't always easy, especially in long seasons of silence, seasons when you've prayed for years for a loved one and seen no change, when your health isn't what it used to be, when you've done everything you know how to do. Have you ever walked through a season like that? I once sat beside the hospital bed of a widowed woman. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "I don't have the strength to pray long prayers anymore, but every day I say one thing, Lord, I'm still here." That is readiness in its purest form, not loud, not impressive, but faithful. Jesus said, Blessed is the servant whom the master finds doing his work when he returns, not panicking, not arguing, but living faithfully with what was entrusted to him. At this point in life, many of us are no longer chasing achievements, but we can still live lives of depth, lives where each day becomes a quiet response to grace. Readiness doesn't pull us away from the world. It makes us more present in it. We listen more carefully. We love more patiently. We judge less quickly. We despair less easily. And when you live that way, Christ's return no longer feels foreign. It feels familiar, like stepping through a door you've already been standing near, not from fear to safety, but from hope to fulfillment. That is what a watchful life produces. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to invite you to pause for a moment. You don't need to answer anything right away. Just listen to your own heart. After everything we've shared, the original question may no longer feel the same. It may no longer sound like, if Jesus came back tonight, would I be afraid? Instead, it becomes something quieter but deeper. Am I living close to him today? In the end, readiness is not a state of constant tension. It doesn't require you to always feel strong, confident, or spiritually energized. It asks for something very human, to remain. To remain in trust, even when you don't understand everything. To remain in prayer, even when your prayer is nothing more than a sigh. To remain in love, even when forgiveness still hurts. I've met people near the end of their lives, lying in hospital beds, too weak to speak much. Yet in their eyes, there was a quiet peace. Not because they believed they had lived perfectly, but because they knew they had not walked away. One elderly man once said to me, "I don't know if I've done enough, but I know I've walked with God this far." That is readiness. Jesus never described his return as a threat to those who love him. He spoke of it as a reunion, a wedding feast, a home already prepared. When you live with that understanding, you stop watching the sky with anxiety. You begin to look at the people around you with gentler eyes. You argue less over small things. You hold ordinary moments more carefully. And even when your faith feels weak, even when your lamp seems barely lit, Scripture reminds us that God never snuffs out a smoldering wick. He bends close and gently breathes life into it with grace. If today you feel distracted, tired, or farther from God than you hoped you'd be, I want you to hear this clearly. It is not too late. Readiness doesn't begin with effort. It begins with surrender, with resetting your priorities, with laying down what has been weighing on your heart, and simply saying to God, "I'm here." One day, when the trumpet sounds and the door opens, you may realize that you were never standing still during all those years of waiting. Every prayer, every act of love, every moment of quiet faithfulness was preparing you for that moment. And when you finally see him, you won't say, "At last, I'm ready." You'll say, "I've been here all along." Until that day comes, live awake, not in fear, but in love. Not in urgency, but in faithfulness. Not to escape this world, but to live fully in it, carrying the light of eternal hope. The bridegroom is coming, and he is coming in love. That is what readiness gives us. Not panic, but peace. Not anxiety, but confidence. Not exhaustion, but rest. And one day, faith will give way to sight. Waiting will give way to joy, and love will finally bring us home.